Welcome, everyone. Thank you for all of you for coming to this online training session today. Over the next hour and a half, we will hear from 5 speakers, including myself, who will be discussing how to research the histories of witchcraft and magic in library collections and online resources as well. So I'll just introduce you quickly to our speakers today. Based at the University of Bristol, we have Dr. Julie Phillips, who will be discussing digital humanities approaches to researching Victorian witchcraft and the development of modern paganism. Then we move on to Claire Lappin, who is Assistant Librarian at the Warburg Institute. Claire will be introducing the Warburg Library's magic and science collections with a focus on Renaissance magic, alchemy, and divinity. Then we move to Tansy Barton, who is Academic Librarian for Manuscript and Print Studies at Sennehouse Library, London. She will be introducing the library's magic, occult, and paranormal collections, with a particular focus on the Harry Price collection. Then we'll be moving to myself, who is a collection librarian at the IHR Library, and I'll be speaking about using the library's collections to research witchcraft and magic in and beyond the American collections. And then lastly, we have Jenny Lalkesh-Rarugal, editor of the Bibliography of British and Irish History, who will be demonstrating how to use the bibliography to research the histories of witchcraft and magic in religion and entertainment. There will be a quick Q&A session at the end, so if you have any questions or comments during the presentations, please do put them in the chat. And also, just lastly, also please be aware that this session is being recorded, so we ask if your microphones could be on mute and if you may wish to turn your camera off as well. So, without further ado, we'll move on to the presentation by Dr. Julia Phillips.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Michael. I'll just share my screen. And hopefully everyone can see that. So in today's presentation, I'm going to begin briefly by introducing the field of digital humanities, and will then highlight some of the many digital options that are available to historians in the field of witchcraft studies. The presentation will then examine the expansion of the newspaper industry in Victorian Britain and how this influenced the study of modern witchcraft. The developments in digital humanities include computer-based statistical analysis, search and retrieval, topic modelling, and data visualization. And I'll come back to that with a specific example of one very useful tool in a moment. An application of this broad-based research as a methodology reveals very insightful perspectives that would be difficult to identify if restricted to print collections. Now, Andrew Snedden, who has used both print and digital archives for his research into Irish witchcraft, explains it very well. He said that using hard copies of newspapers, you miss out on what he calls the white noise surrounding witchcraft and magic. In other words, the poems, the plays, and the adverts, and the weird knowledge in the little snippet sections. There are, of course, some disadvantages in research using digital sources, including what Patrick Leary calls the offline penumbra, where sources that have not yet been digitized are ignored and important data can remain undiscovered. Digital archives are also removed from the physicality of the sources, which can be significant in some cases, especially where the materiality of the collection informs the interpretation. Digital resources have grown enormously over the past 20 years or so, and it's now possible to access a vast range of primary sources. As an example, the image on the left is from the New York Public Library. the one in the middle from the University of Glasgow, and the image on the right shows some of the witchcraft classroom resources from the National Archives at Kew. Gale combines many different databases into a single archive, which makes it an immensely powerful and flexible digital tool. The image on the left shows the product menu for Gale, and with the image on the right showing the categories available in the segment of the archives dedicated to primary sources. You can select one or more categories, or you can do a cross-search against the whole archive. This is the data analysis tool I mentioned earlier. It's not the only one available, but it is often promoted by institutions that have a license for the Gale archive. Now, Gale Digital Scholar Lab enables the researcher to build a personalised data set drawn from records not only contained in Gale's databases, but also documents drawn from other sources, including your own records. After building and cleaning a custom content data set, the Digital Scholar Lab can analyse the data with text mining and visualisation tools. And the outputs include document clustering, named entity recognition, engrams, and topic modelling. And a few examples are shown in the image on the right here. These images show the British Library's British Newspaper Archive, or B&A. It currently has over 75 million pages, with more being added daily. When the British Library began its digitisation project in 2004, it prioritised newspapers and periodicals published in the 19th century, and especially during the Victorian period. And you can see from this chart how rapidly this one archive grew between the end of 2020, when I started my research, and the beginning of 2024. The priority given to newspapers published during the Victorian period was a consequence of the rapid growth in the number of newspapers being published in the second half of the 19th century, particularly provincial newspapers. And this is the main reason that I chose this period for my examination of witchcraft. The volume of source material available meant that my study could lead to some important insights. One of the primary factors in the growth of the newspaper industry was significant change to the regulatory framework. In particular, the removal of the so-called taxes on knowledge, which occurred over a relatively short period of time. Technological advances were also significant. With the invention and rapid evolution of the steam printing press, automation in the process of compositing, the growth of the railways, and of course the electric telegraph. And alongside these technical and regulatory changes was societal change, which affected and guided the content that newspapers published. Newspapers continued to present national and international news in the prosaic style that was established in the 17th and 18th centuries. But as the 19th century evolved, they became much more attuned to what we might refer to as tabloid journalism. This style of reporting came to be known as new journalism and was strongly criticised by national newspaper editors as, quote, attention-grabbing, commercial, ephemeral, and distracting. It was, of course, all of those things, but most importantly, it sold newspapers. And as noted very early on by Owen Davis, the newspaper archive is potentially the largest untapped source of material concerning popular belief in witchcraft and magic for the period after the formal cessation of the witchcraft trials in 1736. A digital humanities approach to the research methodology used for my doctoral thesis revealed a wide array of categories that would not have been apparent if using a more conventional methodology. Until recent years, witchcraft studies really focused upon trials of alleged witches. And whilst that remains an important aspect of our research, the digitization of primary sources provides the researcher with a much more expansive story of how witches were viewed during the 19th century. This is an example of the use of witchcraft to mock politicians and undermine their political arguments. It also includes a reference to Macbeth, which was very, very common. In fact, the sheer magnitude of references to Shakespeare's Macbeth was extraordinary. In Lancashire, reports of formal dinners often included lists of toasts, with one to the Lancashire witches, highlighting the beauty and modesty of the ladies of Lancashire. This example by Charles Dickens is quite typical of the style of the toast, although, as you might expect, a bit more dramatic than the usual after-dinner toast. A great many newspaper reports in Victorian Britain did relate to legal action, although many instances related to fraud on the part of the alleged witch. There were also numerous accounts of what has become known as reverse witchcraft, or witches as victims, such as the murder of Anne Tennant in September 1875 in the Warwickshire village of Long Compton. Reports of the incident, as well as the inquest and trial, appeared in more than 250 newspapers throughout Britain. Witchcraft continued to appear in the press beyond the 19th century, and there are numerous reasons for this, but unfortunately I haven't got time to talk about in this presentation. But one consequence of the regular appearance of articles about witchcraft was that it paved the way for the emergence and acceptance of modern pagan witchcraft in the 1950s. These two articles from 1951 are fairly typical of the publicity surrounding the emergence of modern pagan witchcraft, which came to be known as Wicca. This example demonstrates the importance of the press in the establishment of the new religion of Wicca. This article and the one of the Sunday pictorial on the previous slide are held in the collection of a small independent museum known as the Museum of Witchcraft and Magic, located in Boscastle in Cornwall. These sources are not part of a major collection, which can be challenging for the researcher as they're not readily available for study. And this leads me to a few final comments about the accessibility of digital archives. One issue with digital archives is that they are generally commercial enterprises. And if you are not connected with an academic institution or library that has a subscription, it can be difficult to access them. For example, the British Newspaper Archive allows new users to view 3 pages, but to use the full archive requires a subscription of £15 a month or a 12-month subscription of £100. Other digital archive services are only available through an institutional login, which can be a problem for people who are not currently engaged in studying at a university or are members of a library. And the good news is that the Senate House Library, the Warburg Institute, and the Institute of Historical Research have options for people who are not formally connected to a university or other institution, although this is limited to those who are able to visit the libraries in person because remote access is not permitted under license. And all of these details will be available after the presentation. And this is the access for the Warburg Library resources available on site. And you can find more information about those on the library guides address that's showing on the screen. And similarly, the Institute of Historical Research Warburg Library's e-resources are available on site, and you can find information about them on this link. And finally, the Bibliography of British and Irish History is available on site for the Institute of Historical Research Library and Senate House Library members. And there are individual subscriptions available. And some of the memberships shown here receive substantially reduced individual subscription rates. So again, the link is on the screen if you'd like to find out more information about that particular resource. So in conclusion, I'd like to thank you all and hope that you found the presentation of interest. And the Q&A will, as Michael said earlier, be in the chat at the end of the presentations. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Julia. That was an excellent presentation there. Right, so moving on now, we have, as I say, Claire Lappin, who will talk about the Warburg's collections on magic.
Yes, thank you, Michael. I hope everybody can see my screen now. So my name is Claire Lappin, and I'm going to talk today about magic and science at the Warburg Institute. Before I go into that, I just wanted to make clear that all the texts that I mentioned today during this presentation are freely available online, either through the Warburg Library catalogue or through our website. So if there's anything that you see here today that's of interest, it's available to you even if you can't come to the Institute, and you can have a look at it online. Before I talk about magic and science, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the Warburg Institute, for those of you who don't know anything about us. We are a research institute, a postgraduate research institute with a national role. As part of the School of Advanced Study, we serve the national academic community and the international academic community. And we are also part of the University of London. We are a leading centre for the interdisciplinary study of cultural history and the role of images in society. We have teaching staff who offer postgraduate certificates, MAs, PhDs. We have many fellowships. And as well as being a teaching and research institute, we also have a library of coming up to about 400,000 books, a photographic collection and an archive. And we have been, for the past 2 years, undergoing a major building project, which will hopefully be finished in a couple of months. And that will give us also a new auditorium for events and a gallery for displays and exhibitions, which is going to give us hopefully a new public-facing role. The Institute has often had a rather unusual reputation. When the New Yorker magazine devoted an article to the Institute in 2015, they described us as the world's weirdest library, a place where, to quote, magic and science, evil eyes, and saints' lives, these things repose side by side in a labyrinth of imagery and icons and memory. Which, let's be honest, makes us sound absolutely amazing. The world's weirdest library may be overkill, but it's definitely an idiosyncratic library. with amazing holdings organized in a fairly unusual way. And that's because it began as the personal library of a very idiosyncratic scholar, A.B. Warburg, who was a German art and cultural historian who was fascinated by the Italian Renaissance and by the way in which images and ideas traveled from the ancient world into the Renaissance and onwards. And luckily for the purposes of this workshop, he was also fascinated by the history of myth, magic, and ritual. And these interests can be seen very clearly in his final work, which is very well known. It's the Bilder Atlas Mnemosyne, which is essentially the image atlas named after the goddess of memory, where he attempted to trace those journeys of particular images and concepts. And several of the panels in that project deal with esoteric subjects. So if you're interested, you can have a look through an online exhibition devoted to that project on our website. So Warburg was collecting books throughout his life, and his personal library grew so large that he turned it into a research institute in his native Hamburg. And after his death, the institute continued, but with the rise of the Nazi Party in Germany in 1933, the institute was exiled to London and has been in London ever since. Because of Warburg's reputation for being interested in the history of magic, and because of the library's excellent holdings on magic, the institute has always had a reputation for taking the study of the history of magic seriously. And that in turn has drawn other scholars to the institute to work on similar subjects. So Warburg scholars have included D.P. Walker, writing on spiritual and demonic magic, Francis Yates, writing on the Hermetic tradition. The institute published 3 separate editions of the Picatrix, which is a major Arabic text on magic. And our current Professor Charles Burnett works on the transmission of knowledge through the medieval Islamic world, including works on magic, astrology, and divination. So you can see from the kinds of work that Warburg scholars have done that there's a specific type of magic that is studied in this institute, and that is Renaissance magic. So this is a particularly learned and erudite form of magic, which emerged in the later Middle Ages and the Renaissance and early modern periods. The Renaissance generally is characterized by a very strong revival of interest in ancient texts. And the study of magic grew out of and was pursued alongside the study of subjects like philosophy, medicine, astronomy, science, engineering. But it was also influenced by an interest in hidden knowledge. So a new interest in Neoplatonic philosophical ideas of angelic and demonic spirits, a new interest in Jewish texts like the Kabbalah, and an interest in ancient magical texts like the Hermetica, which were attributed to the legendary figure of Hermes Trismegistus. So this was not a popular magic or folk magic, it was book magic. And the key figures in the history of Renaissance magic were often intellectual stars of their day, polymaths who worked under the patronage of very powerful patrons. So these were people like Marsilio Ficino and Giovanni Pico della Mirandola, who were Neoplatonic philosophers in the circle of Lorenzo de' Medici in Renaissance Florence. Or in the 16th century, 2 figures represented here by 2 manuscripts held at the Warburg Institute. So on the left, the first manuscript is attributed to John Dee, another polymath, a scientist, a mathematician, an advisor to Elizabeth I, and also a very well-known occultist. This manuscript is the first known manuscript of the Tuba Veneris, which is a text all about conjuring and conversing with angelic spirits. And the second manuscript is partly attributed to Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa, again, an intellectual who was writing on all sorts of subjects, including occult philosophy, under the patronage this time of Margaret of Austria. This manuscript is called La Clavicule Magique. It is a French edition of a text more generally known as the Lesser Key of Solomon, which purported to be an ancient text, but was actually a more recent compilation, including some of the work of Agrippa. And as I say, both these manuscripts held at the Warburg, digitized online and available to download through our library catalogue if you'd like to read them. And the final figure I just wanted to mention is Giordano Bruno, another major figure in intellectual history who was writing on philosophy, on science, on cosmology, and also about magic. He was a very important figure for A.B. Warburg, who purchased a huge collection of books on him. These were added to by Francis Yates. And in 2007, the Institute took on a project to digitize the key primary and secondary texts for Bruno's studies, which are fully available on our website to download and browse through the Biblioteca Bruniana Electronica. So this concept of Renaissance magic is very clearly visible in the Warburg's classification system. The classification here is unique, and it was devised especially for this personal library begun by A.B. Warburg. And it is divided into 4 different themes. The first theme is image, which is essentially art history. The second is word, which is texts and how they travel. The third theme is orientation, which is how humans understand their place in the universe, or possibly try to control the universe around them. And that is divided between religion, magic and science, and philosophy. And then the final theme is action, which is how humans go out and act in the world, which is society and culture and history. And on the right-hand side, you can see the breakdown of our magic and science section. And you can clearly see there the influence of that concept of Renaissance magic. In most libraries, you would never find magic and science in the same place. They're usually quite far apart in the classification system. But obviously, in historical context, in the concept of Renaissance magic, there was no rigid dividing line between magic and science. So we have a single class mark for alchemy and chemistry, and a single class mark for astrology and astronomy. And then even class marks which might at first glance seem quite dry, like FN, mathematics. The very first class mark in that section is called the magic of number. So this is not by any means a standard science collection. If you're interested in that magic and science, and even if you can't visit the library, we have digitized 380 books from A.B. Warburg's own personal collection on magic and science, which covers a huge range of topics, going from the ancient world, from Babylonian magic, right up to books that would, for Warburg, have been absolutely contemporary. So there's a book in that collection dating from 1915 about prophetic voices and supernatural visions in the First World War, so published literally in the first year of that war. So you can browse Ex Libris A.B. Warburg Magic and Science on our website. And then I just wanted to touch on a few specific areas of our collections where we have interesting material. So the first class mark I wanted to highlight was divination, partly because it's one of my favorite sections in the library, and it's a wonderful place to take visitors, because as you walk down and you read the subjects on the end of the stacks, the divination one is fantastic. Monsters, comets, divination from involuntary movements. And it's a kind of, you want to plunge into the stacks and start reading. The image on the slide here is from that divination section, from the comets class mark, and it's a gorgeous manuscript from around 1587, a Flemish manuscript describing and showing the kind of baleful effects of comets. So the illustration there shows a town on fire as the comet goes overhead. It's a very beautiful manuscript, again, held in the library, digitized and available for download online. And we also have in that divination section a really interesting section on fortune-telling games and cartomancy as divinatory practices. So these are things like the books illustrated here, which are two early Italian printed texts showing different types of fortune-telling. So you can have the fortune-telling through the wheels of fortune on the left-hand side, or the other book using the throwing of the dice. And these books offer answers to questions from basic things like, is the horse I want to buy a good one? Right up to huge questions like, when am I going to die? And when will the world end? We also have in that section excellent holdings on cartomancy, including on tarot. And the Institute does also hold the original Thoth tarot paintings, which were devised by the 20th century occultist Aleister Crowley and painted by Frida Harris. We have never had the ability to display those because we've never had any exhibition space, but because of the Warburg Renaissance project of building and refurbishment, we now will have a gallery space where we'll be able to display those original paintings. And it's planned that the very first exhibition in that space in January 2025 will be on the tarot. The other class mark I just wanted to highlight briefly is alchemy and chemistry. This is another section where you can see that influence of Renaissance magic, where magic and science merge into each other. We have excellent holdings in alchemy, not least because of the Innes collection, which we received from the estate of Michael Innes in 2012, of over 600 early printed books and manuscripts, primarily on alchemy, but also on other topics, including, again, a beautifully illustrated manuscript, this one circa 1700, the Cabala Mineralis, which is an alchemical text dedicated to the alchemical uses of urine. One of only 2 known copies of this manuscript, again, digitized and available to download online. And then the final thing I wanted to highlight is the iconography of magic and science. So at the Warburg, we have a photographic collection, which holds a huge number of photographs of works of art, organized iconographically by subject. So if you're interested in a particular theme or image, such as, for instance, the example I put here on the slide is the image of witches, you can trace the development and changes in how that concept or theme is depicted through time, through space, different artists, and different media. If you are able to visit in person, the photographic collection has around 30,000 images in their collection on magic and science, on a broad range of subjects. If you can't visit in person, you can still search online. They're in the process of digitizing the photographic collection into the iconographic database, which holds around 16,000 browsable images in the magic and science section. So if any of that is of interest to you, you are very welcome to join the Warburg Library. We are free and accessible to all academic staff, students. If you are an independent researcher, you would need to bring a photo ID, letter of recommendation, and proof of address. So you can check online for information about that. But even if you can't come and use the library, I would recommend you keep an eye on our events page to see if there's anything of interest to you. For instance, this short course coming up soon, unfortunately booked out, but it's the kind of thing that we do. So it's worth having a look. So thank you very much for listening. I'll be very happy to answer questions at the end in the Q&A session, or you can feel free to email us with more detailed queries at the Warburg Library's email address. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. Having used the Warburg Library in the past, and obviously it's a fascinating place, and I'm really looking forward to seeing it when it's finally, at the end of its renovation process.
Yes.
So, right, now moving on, we're going to, Tansy Barton will be speaking about the brilliant collections in Senate House Library, especially the Harry Price collection.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you, Jenny, both of you, for organising the event this afternoon. I'll just start my slideshow. Okay, thank you. So my name's Tansy Barton. I'm part of the Modern Collections team at Senate House Library, which is a central library for the University of London, but we are open to researchers both nationally and internationally beyond the University of London. And as part of my job, as well as my main job covering the library's collections in manuscript studies and print studies, I also look after our collections on the magical, the occult and paranormal. And I'm just going to introduce those collections to you this afternoon. Our main collection in the subject is the Harry Price Library of Magical Literature, which is one of our special collections. It's a library of printed material, ephemera, offprints, periodicals, pamphlets, but also an archive of material. The library was collected by Harry Price, who you can see in this top picture here, investigating a haunted bed in Chiswick with the philosopher C.M. Joad, who I will mention a bit more later as well. And he cites his interest in the paranormal and unexplained beginning when he was a child and off school with a toothache, was taken into the centre of Salisbury and saw a touring magic show. He was pulled up onto the stage. The kind of magician come witch doctor performed the show, cured his toothache, and then made doves appear from a hat and performed various other magic tricks. He wanted to know, he questioned his parents, how could this be done? And they gave him Professor Hoffman's Modern Magic, one of the most important books on conjuring in the 19th century. And that was the beginning, by his own account, of his interest and of his library. And the library really does cover a wide range of subjects within these kind of very broad terms of the paranormal, occult and magic and unexplained. Psychical research, which Price was directly involved in the 1920s and 1930s, is a big theme. Spiritualism, the occult revival, elements of folklore. It really is a very, very wide-ranging collection. And Price built it up as a collector of this material, but it was also intended to be a tool for the investigator, the researcher of unexplained phenomena. And he hoped it would be provide them with resources to identify false phenomena and charlatanism, but also would give them the tools to recognize and possibly prove genuine manifestations of the supernatural, assisting them to separate the few grains of wheat from the vast amounts of chaff in which they are almost lost. So the collection includes a really wide range of formats, as I've already mentioned. In the library itself, you'll find books, pamphlets, cut-ins, offprints. In the archive, it includes letters and scrapbooks, photographs, manuscripts, transcripts of sit-ins of seances. It includes Price's correspondence with a very wide circle of people working in psychical research in the first half of the 20th century, as well as his working papers on the cases he was involved in. And this bottom picture here is just from an exhibition of the library in the 1930s. So to give you an introduction to some of the material that's included in the library on witchcraft and magic, starting with early printed books. These are generally defined as books in the context of this collection from the 1480s up to around 1800. And because of the way the collection was built up and Price's interests, there were a range of views on witchcraft and on magic represented within the collection itself. So a couple of examples here from the kind of very broad side of the same believers. We have this is a early edition of the Malleus Maleficarum. There's early editions of James I's works on witchcraft and demonology, complementing the Warburg's holdings. We also cover things like astrology, alchemy, esotericism, hermeticism. But also we have quite a lot which is on the more rational and skeptical response to ideas of magic and witchcraft. So one of Price's prize sessions was the first edition of Scott's Discovery of Witchcraft, which is pictured at the bottom here, which was a kind of rational response to the idea of the existence of witchcraft. And one of the reasons it was particularly prized for him is it's possibly the first account in English of conjuring tricks. And the reason it's included there is it's showing how things that can appear to be magical were actually produced by very skilled performers. Beyond these books, you can also find treatises, philosophical works, religious tracts on magic, on witchcraft and demonology. You can find a lot of accounts of witchcraft trials, and as I said, skeptical and rationalist responses. Moving into the 18th century, popular astrology, popular magic is very well represented as well in the collection. To find this type of material in the collection, probably the best way is to use keyword, subject heading, or free text searches in the library catalogue, searching for terms such as witchcraft, magic, just magic for this type of magic, and other things along those lines. Moving on to more modern material, the collection is really rich in 19th and 20th century, early 20th century material on magic and witchcraft, but also on associated interests in the paranormal and supernatural, and particularly spiritualism in the 19th century and early 20th century. We continue to add to the collection today, and just here are some examples of books that have been added in the last kind of 2 or 3 years to the collection, where we are trying to add examples of contemporary practice and contemporary practitioners into the collection and kind of broaden its range of coverage. So let's say there's another big theme within the 19th and 20th century holdings is something that Julie's already mentioned as well, is magic in mainstream media and the popular press. Price collected cuttings from popular magazines, thinking things like Pearson's, where any kind of mention of magic, of witchcraft, of the unexplained, the unusual, even things like strange animal behavior. And he took these cuttings and put them all together in a series of volumes, which he called Magic from the Magazines, or Magazine Magic. And these were really useful resource to kind of looking at the type of things that was being reported, which was covered what magazines were presenting to their readers in this kind of subject area in the late 19th and early 20th century. So as I say, current acquisitions, you can see some examples here. And another area that has been really interesting to explore lately is to pick up small press publications and zines on magic, magical kind of Gothic and folk horror literature and things like that, which now go into the collection. Just to mention briefly, which is a little bit out of scope of today's session, but is a very important part of the collection, and may be important to consider when you're thinking about the terms you're using to search for material on magic and witchcraft, is the collection is also very strong in stage magic. So the book that started it for Price is pictured here, Professor Hoffman's Modern Magic, but the collection also is really rich in books on magic tricks, on legerdemain, on stage illusion from the 16th to the 20th century. So we have here an example of an example from the 17th century, the Hocus Pocus Junior, and another one from Professor Anderson from the 19th century. And we had an exhibition on this subject in 2017. So if it is something you're interested in, you can find some more information on the archived website for that exhibition. But the reason Price was collecting this material was that particularly in the 19th century and early 20th century, many magicians were involved in exposing mediums and spiritualists who claimed to have certain powers, but were quite often using the same techniques and skills as magicians. So magicians had the training to understand what was being done when something was being attributed to a particular kind of phenomena. And that's why that's such a big part of the collection. So to look into the collection in a bit more depth, I wanted to just pick out one aspect to explore the kind of range of material that you can find in the collection, something that was Price was directly involved in, and also involved magic. And that was something called the Brocken experiment, which took place in 1932. So the Brocken is a mountain peak in the Harz mountain range in Germany, and it has long been associated with witchcraft and magic. And in 1932, Price arranged to travel to the Brocken with the CEM Jode, who we saw earlier investigating the haunted bed. And it was connected to the celebrations of Goethe's centenary, as the Brocken features in Faust, and is connected with Walpurgis Night and various other things. And they went there to recreate something called the Blocksberg Tryst, and Blocksberg was an older name for the Brocken. And this was a black magic transformation ritual, which Price had an early 19th century manuscript copy of, which he claimed had been copied from a 15th century High German black book. He doesn't really go into any more detail about where this actually came from. Yeah, so he arranged in 1932 to travel to the Brocken to recreate this ritual, and the purpose of the ritual was to transform a he-goat into a fair youth of surpassing beauty. And it involved various trappings, scraping from church bells, a full moon, a pure maiden, incense, incantations, bat's blood, soot, honey, and various other things. And as with many of the investigations and experiments Price was directly involved in, there was a huge amount of material in the archive relating to this. We have photographs, we have lots of correspondence relating to it, we have many press cuttings, which I'll come on to, and also some film footage, which I will just show you now. So Price was very interested in adopting new technology. So he was a big early adopter of film, and he filmed the rehearsal for this experiment, this so-called experiment, at the Brocken. And this is the footage with the edited version of the footage. This is Price himself performing the incantations. So as you can see for that, it wasn't taken, I think, in retrospect entirely seriously. And Price's stated aim in doing this was to subject, in his view, a medieval black magic ritual to 20th century scientific conditions. He said his stated aim was to emphasize the absolute futility of ancient magical ritual under 20th century conditions. And he was determined to carry out the experiment with scientific exactitude in order to forestall any criticism by the remaining devotees of the black art. So it was effectively trying to show the futility of the belief in black magic in 1932. So there is huge amounts of press cuttings related to this in the archive, which reveal some really interesting views through the popular press about the idea of black magic, about the idea of experimenting with this type of ritual. And a really rich seam of material can be found in the scrapbooks in the archive of the collection, which can be found by searching just as a keyword search for Brocken in the archive catalogue, in our archive catalogue. This type of research involves an element of trawling through scrapbooks once you have them, but there is a great deal of really interesting material that you can find. Much of the coverage is frankly kind of silly season, sensationalist stories, very incredulous about the whole thing. And unsurprisingly, there's a lot of focus on the young woman involved in the ceremony, Uta Bon, and also the goat actually as well was a very popular figure. But there was also interestingly some stories alongside this about the potential danger of black magic and the threat it posed. And somewhat unsurprisingly, this experiment didn't go down very well in many quarters, with some interest, and there's some very interesting responses found in the scrapbooks. And you've got here, there's an editorial from the Occult Review, which was, as the name implies, an occult periodical, which both dismissed it as a publicity stunt, but also stressed the damage that it could do to occult practitioners and believers. There's also a similar response here from Oliver Lodge, who was a very well-known scientist, but was very involved in psychical research and experimenting with the paranormal, who noted that such stunts could mean that what he perceived to be genuine experiments in the paranormal could be taken less seriously. And then at the other end of the spectrum, there's a letter here to the listener in response to an article Price published on the Brocken experiment from John Benyon Harris, which I think is the true name of John Wyndham. And he is expressing the danger of experimenting with black magic and demonology to actually that you're involving yourself in summoning the devil. And Price, of course, felt all of this quite keenly, and in a letter to a French journalist, René Sudras, soon after the experiment, he lamented, "I have been attacked ever since by people who alleged A, that I made the experiment because I believed in it, and B, because I do not believe in black magic and want to expose it," which was his stated aim, to be fair. And just to highlight a few other interesting things that come out of the scrapbooks on this, there's an element that of highlighting the Brocken's association with witchcraft, which had long been used to encourage tourism. And there's one of the objects in the collection is a Brocken Hotel medal, pictured here, which features a witch on broomstick flying over the hotel. And the Guardian's coverage of the event suggests that it would at least bring attention to the Brocken and the Harz Mountains to English travellers, but it also gives, quite a salient reminder of the context in which this took place, with the quote here. And finally, the fate of the goat was of great interest to people as well. It ended up being acquired by the magician Horace Goldin, who then introduced into his stage act a performance of the ritual, which resulted in a successful transformation from the goat into a man. So that was just to give you an idea of the type of material that you can find just on one theme within the Harry Price archives. To move on to some of our other resources related to witchcraft and magic in the collections. Just wanted to highlight alongside Julia's presentation some other e-resources that we have access to via Senate House Library. Victorian popular culture is a quite wide-ranging database, which includes a unit on spiritualism, sensation and magic. And this includes digitized material from the Harry Price Library, as well as other repositories such as the Houdini collections at the Harry Ransom Centre. And with this, you get all the advantages that you have of full text digitization that you can search within the text, which is a really useful way of starting to find material on particular subjects within the collection. And the database itself also has lots of supporting materials. So there is essays on the collection, biographies, popular search terms, which are always quite interesting to look at. For some of the early printed books on witchcraft and magic, digitized collections such as early English books online and early European books and 18th century collections online, which also can be accessed via the library, are really useful, again, for doing searches within digitized text. And one open access resource I wanted to mention is the International Association for the Preservation of Spiritualist and Occult Periodicals, which is a really valuable resource for anything kind of associated with magic, the occult, the paranormal, and spiritualism from the kind of mid-19th century to the Second World War. We also have several other archives relating to magic and the paranormal, and just a few of them are listed here. Probably the most relevant one to magic and witchcraft is the collection of Eric Dingwall, which includes scrapbooks of his research material and covers a very wide range of subjects similar to the Harry Price Library. These are now catalogued online on our archive catalogue, but not to a very detailed level. So again, when you're working with this material, there is an element of having to trawl and serendipitous discovery, but there's some really interesting material in there to be found as well. And you can find more information on all of these archives on our archive subject guide, which is linked here, but you can also, will be in the link sent out after the event. And we also collect material on witchcraft and magic in the library's modern collections. So the distinction between this and our special collections is modern collections is material that you can either find on the library's open access shelves, or you can request from the library's stack. And so again, this is just some examples of some recent acquisitions in the subject area. In the library itself, you can find printed books under the class mark BF1 in our new acquisition section. You can find older material in the sociology and anthropology sections on the 7th floor. Also, there will be a lot in history and English literature collections as well. We also get a lot as ebooks, and they can be found again via the library catalogue or on our main ebook platform, eBook Central. So just to cover some practical information about accessing and using the collections, if you want to start searching our catalogue, you can do that. It's freely accessible. You do not need to be a member to search the catalogue. If you are starting to do research in this area within our collections, probably the best way to do it is either keyword searches or doing subject heading searches for subjects such as magic, witchcraft, ritual, charms, and Wicca and occultism can bring up some interesting results as well. Because of the way the Harry Price Library was catalogued, quite often subject headings were added by the cataloguers as things were being catalogued. So they are often quite specific to the nature of the material in the collection. And just one distinction to make in terms of terminology is that we describe kind of effective magic as magic, and we describe stage magic as magic tricks in the subject headings. The Harry Price Library and its archive is part of our special collections. So this is material that can only be used in our special collections reading room. And that material does need to be requested in advance, but that can be done through the library catalogue and be done prior to registering for the library as well. Some material may be closed, but the vast majority of the collections are open. And as Julia's already mentioned, e-resources and ebooks can be accessed on site if you are not a University of London member via the library's Wi-Fi network. If you are a University of London member, a lot of our resources can be accessed off-site as well, our e-resources. And just to mention quickly on membership, you can find more information about this on the library website. If you are a University of London student, just look at the website for information of how to pre-register online. If you are a UK researcher or an overseas researcher at PhD or at PhD level, or you're an academic, you can register for free reference membership. But we do also offer free access to our special collections that just needs to be arranged in advance by contacting our special collections team. And just finally, say thank you very much for this very whistle-stop introduction to the collections at Senate House. There's detailed contact details there for me and for our special collections team, so do get in touch if you have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Tansy. That was a brilliant introduction to quite a wide array of collections. So, right, I will just share my screen now. Okay, hopefully people can. I hope everyone can see that. Right. Okay, so right, as said, good afternoon. I'm Michael Townsend, one of the collection librarians here at the Institute for Historical Research. Before I begin, just letting everyone know, I'll be naming various resources, but as has already been mentioned, don't worry, these will be included in a list of links and resources sent at the end of the workshop, as well as the slides from all the different presentations. Why is that not working? Oh, there we go. So, first I'll give a brief overview of the Institute and its library. Then I'll briefly discuss some of the relevant types of sources which might be of interest to researchers of the histories of magic and witchcraft, focusing on our Latin American, Caribbean and Southern United States collections. My presentation will then end in a brief case study. So, because I'm just speaking here for a few minutes, let's start with a simple question. What is magic? So one which remains prominent to various disciplines about magic, whether it's history, sociology or anthropology, is what is it, can it be different, and how is it differentiated from religion or practices considered within now the remit of science, such as medicine. Some, especially in the early 20th century, have attempted various overarching definitions, such as Marcel Mauss, making the distinction between magic as an essentially private, solitary act, and religion, which is often, although not always, conducted in a public communal space. However, there are possibly too many exceptions to make this satisfactory. The approach I've adopted here, and again, it's not entirely perfect, magic and witchcraft is often defined so by centres of dominance and power, such as the institutions of a church or a government. So many of the primary sources to be discussed here actually highlight aspects of maybe possibly indigenous religion or religions such as Obeah or the various branches of voodoo, which has often been viewed through the lens of European magical culture. It's a question worthy of consideration, unfortunately, not just in the remaining minutes of the presentation here. Moving on, I'll be talking about primary and secondary sources. I didn't want to assume everyone has the same definition as myself. So in my head, at least, a primary source is something like a letter or a diary written at the time. The definition also doesn't necessarily have to be textual. It can be a building, a material object, a painting, for example. Also, the definition isn't necessarily fixed. While a typical secondary work might be considered a history written after the event, histories of the Mexican conquest, for example, written in the 17th century, can also be considered as a primary source now, reflecting how the event was considered during the time of Spanish rule. Now with these preliminaries out of the way, I'll move on. Here we have just a few points explaining what the IHR is for anyone who might not have heard of us. The Institute is just over a century old now and is part of a large body called the School of Advanced Study, which also includes institutes such as the speakers today, such as from the Warburg Institute. The IHR also offers a busy calendar of events and courses, including dozens of seminars, which are free to attend, both in person and online, as well as the library, which we'll be now moving on to. Right. There we go. Over the last century, the library has amassed a collection of over 220,000 titles. The main remit of the library is to collect published primary sources, which make up the vast bulk of what can be found on the shelves. Although we also actively collect published bibliographies and source guides, archive manuscript catalogues, historiography, and some reference works, and approximately about 300, I think, last counted, history periodicals. Chronologically, we cover everything from the early medieval period, and geographically, we focus on Western Europe and the colonial histories of the West European empires, North and South America, as well as regional and local history as well. Unlike the other libraries that you've heard presentations from today, the IHR does not have a specific large collection on the history of magic and witchcraft, although you can find a section within our general religious history collection under the shelf mark ER858, where you'll find general historical sources such as the Malleus Maleficarum, a small selection of grimoires, such as published editions of the Picatrix, and general anthologies of sources such as the Witchcraft Sourcebook. Other works are dispersed across the library's geographic collections. For example, sources on the Pendle Witches is in the library's Lancashire collection, while the Diary of John Dee is located in our Tudor collection. The library's North and South American collections cover the history of these continents from the late 15th century to the present day. And as mentioned previously, these collections, like the others in the library, consist mainly of primary sources, such as letters, diaries, travel accounts, and published institutional records. The Caribbean and Latin American collections are particularly strong for the colonial period, especially with our sub-collections on Mexico, Brazil, Peru, Cuba, Haiti, and well, the colonial history of Hispaniola. That obviously includes Haiti, as well as, with the War of Independence and the Revolution. And our collection on the US South is strong for the antebellum period, as well as the Civil Rights Movement. So, what can be found within these collections on witchcraft and magic? The approach I generally adopt is to find the easiest discoverable works first, which I call here explicit works. It's quite obvious that they are about the subject at hand. For example, here we have an edition of essays looking into the history of witchcraft in Spain and the New World, which can be found in our general Latin American history collection, while others listed here are part of our Cuban, US, and Colombian history collections. One type of explicit work I'd like to highlight are what might be called surveys of indigenous religion. Although as part of the Spanish and Portuguese empires, Latin America was part of the Catholic world. Unsurprisingly, indigenous beliefs and practices persisted. Local church authorities were concerned about these indigenous beliefs, fearing their new converts would stray from their faith into what they viewed as diabolism. Part of this anxiety produced several works which surveyed local beliefs and practices, such as fortune telling, love magic, as well as practical magic associated with hunting or agriculture. One of the works included here in this slide by Hernando de Rios de Alarcon's Tratado even recalled spells in the language of central Mexico, Nahuatl. Although seen very much through a Catholic lens, they do offer a rare glimpse into the magical cultures of colonial Latin America. So, just as in the other libraries, to find works such as these and others, the first port of call will be the catalogue. We share our catalogue with several other libraries, such as in the rest of the School of Advanced Studies, such as the Warburg Institute, the Institute of Classical Studies and Advanced Legal Studies, as well as Senate House Library as well. Although there is the option to search in our library only. Like other catalogues, there are options to do keyword searches, which would produce quite a few hits. Obviously, if you do a keyword search for magic, you'll get lots of stuff on magical realism, which is brilliant in itself, but might not be what you're looking for. But you can also do things like title searches. And if you've got a specific thing in mind, you can do subject searches as well, which is how I find found the title highlighted on this slide, doing a subject search for the term magic, produced a list of all the IHR items with magic or words beginning with magic listed on one of the subjects in the catalogue database. This led me to the specific work on the Denmark-Vesey slave revolt of 1822 and the role played by the Methodist practitioner and hoodoo practitioner, Gullah Jack. Though the catalogue and the library's collections pages can also search our list of online resources, such as JSTOR, UK Parliamentary Papers, and the Burney collections of 17th and 18th century newspapers. Just to note, and it's already been noted already, due to licensing restrictions, we are presently unable to offer remote access to our readers to the majority of these resources, unfortunately. Right, so moving on from the more obvious finds, I'll now briefly discuss what I've come to call implicit sources. These don't immediately indicate that they might have useful information, but a look inside can often reveal useful information as well. For example, within the anthology of Franciscan writing is included statements recorded in a witchcraft trial in early 17th century city of Celaya in central Mexico. In addition, I wanted to mention one of the most well-known sources of 16th century Mexico, Bernardino de Sahagún's Historia General de las Cosas de Nueva España. This compendious survey of indigenous civilization includes a broad range of subjects, including indigenous religions, ceremonies, mythologies, divination, and astrology. As we've already seen, the church took an active interest in documenting spiritual practices it deemed concerning. Although we have discussed some specific works already, the subject of witchcraft and magic periodically makes an appearance in more general types of sources, such as ecclesiastical visitations, Inquisition records, as you might imagine, and shown here, missionary writing. The example of this slide was found in a rather large multi-volume anthology of Jesuit missionary writing from our colonial Brazilian collection. The report describes how certain environments, such as forests and rivers, were inhabited by evil spirits, and how indigenous peoples employed magic practices to ward off their malign influence. Of course, the account does come to the conclusion that the only sure method to evade these entities was through the belief in the church. Besides the church, there was also a raft of more secular sources which mention to varying degrees of detail magic practices and practitioners, such as published digests of laws and contemporary accounts of events, such as those shown here, which one of them which is gives an account of the Haitian voodoo priest or Dutty Bookman, together with the priestess Cecile Fatiman, who were instrumental in the early stages of the Haitian Revolution. Also listed here is Edward Long's History of Jamaica. It gives an account of the religious practices of the enslaved and free populations, giving a window into the development of Obeah in Jamaica. However, one should bear in mind that this is an extremely hostile account, exposing extreme racist foods that were extreme even for the late 18th century. It kind of like leads me on, it's frustrating the voice of the practitioner, and recipients of magical action are often not present in the collections yet to counter the skewed accounts presented so far. However, this lacunae is shared with other aspects of the history of magic and witchcraft, with the exception of what might be called the ceremonial or learning magic found in medieval and Renaissance grimoires, for example, or when sources become more varied and numerous, such as during the 20th century. The appearance of the practitioner is fleeting often, and their voice is often absent from the historical record, unfortunately. Limitations are present within every library, collection or archive. However, I can't think of any research that can be done solely on one roof, no matter how large. Listed here are several general tools I use to track down resources for library users, including catalogues such as WorldCat, JISC Library Hub Discover, as well as freely accessible online libraries of scanned books in the Internet Archive, the Hathi Trust, Google Books, and DOAB and DOAJ, the directories of open access books and journals respectively. It's also useful to see if you might be lucky enough to find some resources specifically on your subject as well, whether they're online bibliographies, digital libraries, or research projects such as the Obia Histories listed here. I've also found bibliographies and notes in secondary monographs to be quite useful too, alerting me to references otherwise scattered in newspaper collections, for example, or in relevant archives. So just to summarize, this is my own approach to finding relevant material. So you might have slightly different approaches. Firstly, what I do is I identify explicit sources, so low-hanging fruit. Then I search within implicit sources and then continue to search beyond the collection. This I applied to a case study identifying some sources about the 19th century religious and community leader, healer, practicing Roman Catholic, and Louisiana voodoo practitioner Mary Laveau. Doing an initial search on our catalogue, I didn't identify any explicit works currently within our collection. However, there were several specifically on within our Louisiana and Civil War collections, which give general accounts of New Orleans throughout the 19th century, so some context there. Searching the online resources as well, accessible within the IHR, were also several articles discussing aspects of her life and the subsequent legend that was constructed around her memory. I then looked beyond to see what could be freely accessed online. Shown here are some of the newspaper articles and contemporary books which have been digitized via resources such as Chronicling America, Google Books, and the Internet Archive. And going back to one of the points that Julia made earlier, it's important to bear in mind that not everything yet is available online, unfortunately. While researching this case study, I discovered Laveau is mentioned in a set of interviews taken as part of the Federal Writers Project, a New Deal Works program started in 1935. Although many have found a home online as part of the Library of Congress's Born in Slavery project, the ones conducted for Louisiana, I've not been able to find yet. Hopefully they'll be available online soon. Although there is a detailed archive listing of the collection, which currently resides in Northwestern State University, Louisiana. So I hope this brief talk will be useful in helping you extract as much information as possible from our collections, or any collections, to be honest. Lastly, shown here are details about how to join the IHR Library. Membership is free to everyone, as well as our contact details in case you have any follow-up questions, or if you would like a one-to-one session with a member of the library staff to discuss your research interests, which parts of the IHR collections might be of interest to you, and which other library collections might also be useful as well, not just within the IHR. So thank you. Right, I will just stop sharing my screen. And I'll pass me on to my colleague, Jenny, who will talk about the British and Irish bibliography. So
yeah. Thank you, Mike.
Yeah.
I'm just going to share my screen. So as Mike introduced earlier, I'm Jenny Lelkesh-Rugel, and I'm going to briefly introduce the bibliography of British and Irish history and how you can use it to research the histories of witchcraft and magic. And I'll also talk a little bit about what else you can use the bibliography for besides searching for new materials. So the bibliography was started in 1909 and is a curated list of over 650,000 secondary sources that have been written about British and Irish domestic history, covering the period from 55 BCE to the present day, and also the wider British and Irish worlds, which includes the former British Empire and Commonwealth. BBIH is supported by the Institute of Historical Research, the Royal Historical Society, and our publisher, Brepols. So the bibliography is updated 3 times a year in February, June, and October, and it contains detailed information about books, journal articles and reviews, book chapters from edited collections, and some history PhD thesis. If your research on the histories of witchcraft and magic intersect with Irish history in any capacity, I highly recommend using Irish History Online in conjunction with BBIH so that you don't miss any relevant resources for your research. One thing to note is that Irish History Online is freely available, which you can access from this slide here, whilst BBIH is a subscription resource. So despite its name as the Bibliography of British and Irish History, material covering the rest of the world makes up a really significant portion of our resources. So as an example of the global reach of BBIH, this map here shows the coverage, excluding the British Isles. As you can see, BBIH is particularly strong on former British colonies and Commonwealth countries. So within a global context, some of the more common resources that can be found in BBIH is focus on witchcraft trials and puritanical religious thought towards witchcraft in colonial America. However, BBIH contains a range of resources about witchcraft and magic, such as spiritual and folk medical practices in the Caribbean and India. And in preparation for this workshop, I also found an article that was focusing on witchcraft and taxation during the 1880 Transcaspian Rebellion in South Africa. So if you are at the very beginning of your research and in terms of using BBIH, what I would recommend is having a look at the subject analyzer, which can be found in the author and journal profiles tab. Using this, it allows you to find BBIH's top 50 authors, book series and journal titles on any given BBIH subject. But if you want to find out everything that the bibliography holds on your research topic, I'd recommend using the advanced search, which allows you to conduct bibliographical and subject searches. So 2 things that are important for historical research is that the BBIH's subject tree is unique and has been developed specifically with historians in mind. So it enables you to conduct research at a really granular level. And you can also conduct searches by historical period as well. So when you're conducting subject searching in the advanced search, a really good place to start is our subject tree. So you can either type in your keyword into the search box at the top of the screen, or you can explore the different levels of the subject tree. So as you can see in this example here, the very first column on the left-hand side is the very top level of the subject tree. And as you move towards the right and towards the other columns, they show narrower and narrower terms until you get to the end of that particular subject tree. So the first place to start your research in BBIH is within religious history, as this is where you'll find a number of search terms such as witchcraft, magic as a religious practice and belief, spiritualism, demonology, and also paganism. If your research focuses more on magic as a form of entertainment or witchcraft and magic within the wider popular culture, you'll also find quite a lot of relevant information within the intellectual, cultural and artistic history section. So within this particular area, you'll find biographies and autobiographies of magicians. You'll also find references to early modern drama, 19th and 20th century magic shows and magic within popular culture, so whether that be literature, film, other areas of popular culture, But you'll also find resources as well that focus on astrology, prophecies, folklore, and myths and legends as well. So you will also find relevant information within sources, especially if your research involves using different types of documents and records. For researching the histories of witchcraft and magic, some of the more common sources that you'll find in BBIH are pamphlets, critical editions of primary sources, so that might include diaries or unpublished letters. And surprisingly, you also find a lot to do with archaeological sources, but this is particularly focusing on paganism within Roman Britain. So these three examples that I've given are by no means exhaustive, and I really recommend that you explore BBIH's subject tree so that you can build tailored searches and find information that's relevant for your own research interests. And within the advanced search, you can also enable you to search by geographical location, again, by either typing in the place into the search box at the top of the screen, or by navigating different levels of the place names tree, very much in the same way that you would the subject tree. The place names tree enables you to research places in Britain and Ireland in particular in a really granular level. So it might be to do with a very particular village or a particular area or institution within a city or town. And to help you better navigate the terminology that we use within the place names tree, I'd recommend just having a look at the Gazetteer of British Place Names. And that's a very whistle-stop tour through searching the bibliography. For more information about searching, as well as how the bibliography is updated, I recommend having a look at these tutorial videos that are available on our website. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about what a BBIH record looks like. This is an example of what a record looks like for a book. And one thing to note is that book chapters are called articles within the bibliography. So they're all very much structured in the same way. So you will find bibliographical information at the top of the screen. So that will be the kind of title, author, editor, publisher information. You'll then in the middle find the subject information. So that will be kind of subject, places, people as subject, as well as the period covered. And depending on the type of record that you're looking at, you may find at the bottom external links to book reviews, the full text via the DOI, the journal or publisher homepage, or online databases such as JSTOR or Project Muse. So one thing to note is that any text in green is a link to a new search within the bibliography. So this is particularly helpful if you're wanting to find out what else the bibliography holds on your research topic. So in this example, if we clicked on witchcraft, it would open up a new search within the bibliography and it would bring back everything on that topic. So as you can see, over 800 references are returned. The bibliography also links to external resources such as the Oxford Dictionary of National Biography, the UK National Archives catalogue, and Who's Who or Who Was Who. By clicking on the links, you'll be directed through to those resources. And I've mentioned them here because it's often worthwhile exploring the links within the bibliography, as they're a little bit hidden and can be overlooked, and they will often have really relevant information for your research. So once you've found a relevant resource for your research in BBIH, you can navigate from the bibliography to different library catalogues or online resources. If you're affiliated with an academic institution, make sure that you're logged in through your institutional library account, as this will speed up the process for finding out if your library has print availability or online access. As all the other speakers have mentioned already, specifically within the IHR, Warburg and Senate House libraries, you can access BBIH from the library catalogue or online collection pages when you're in the building on a library computer or on your own device via the University of London Wi-Fi. Due to licensing restrictions, unfortunately, offsite access is mostly limited to students at the School of Advanced Studies and fellows and university staff. But as Julia mentioned in their presentation, individual subscriptions are available to BBIH. So in terms of navigating from BBIH to find the resources, you'll find different options at the top of the screen. Firstly, you can search by your institution library, which may appear as different logos. So there's some examples on the screen. By clicking on that, you'll be taken through to your library catalogue, where you'll be able to find information about print availability or online access. You can also search by Google Books, where you can navigate to WorldCat following different options depending on which view of Google Books that you use. This is particularly helpful if you or your research is based outside the UK or Ireland, or if you want to request an item through interlibrary loan or document supply. And likewise, Disc Library Hub Discover lists the collections over 200 academic, national and specialist libraries in the UK and Ireland, and is another useful resource for finding material if your library doesn't have access to the thing that you found in the bibliography. And so, as I mentioned at the beginning, there are other things that you can also use the bibliography for. One of the things that you can do is you can use it to keep up to date with the latest published research in your field, and you can also use it to manage your reference lists or bibliographies by exporting references. To help you do this, our publisher Breppels has produced a number of tutorial videos, which again can be found on the link in this slide here. So in terms of the first point around keeping up to date with the latest published research in your area, BBIH has an email alert service, which is really easy to set up. So the email alert service allows you to save your searches and then notifies you when a BBIH update contains new records that match your saved searches. So 3 times a year, you will get an email direct to the email that you've set up. And by clicking on the links in that email, you'll be taken through to your personalized listing with all the new materials listed as new. And the bibliography also allows you to quickly compile bibliographies or to add footnotes to your academic work. All you need to do is click on the to cite this record tool and then just copy and paste the citation that you need. And you can also export references to reference management software such as RefWorks, Zotero, or EndNote, which will save you time when compiling your reading list, bibliographies, or footnotes in your academic work. All you would need to do is select export and then choose the most suitable option. Or if you're more familiar with using the Zotero plugin, you can then you can just save from the BBIH search results page the references that are relevant for your own research. And the bibliography also regularly produces themed online reading lists on a range of interdisciplinary areas such as women's history, Black British history, and the history of emotions. So each reading list is freely available and contains around 500 references for recently published materials. And if you'd like to contact the bibliography, contact information can be found on the IHR's website. And you can also keep up to date with the wider work of the bibliography by having a look at the IHR's blog on history, as well as following the IHR on its various channels. So yeah, thank you very much for listening to the presentation. And what we will do now is quickly move on to the Q&A.
Thank you, Jenny. Thank you. That was brilliant. No, that was a brilliant presentation. There's been quite an interesting question in the chat from Bethany. It's basically probably for people that have done research on the history of magic and witchcraft is what is an important must-read fundamental book on magic? Julia, what are your thoughts on this?
It's a very broad question, which I think was reflected in the chat.
Yeah.
And it depends which aspect of magic we're looking at. I mean, I replied that I quite like Bruno because I'm very fond of the approach that Bruno always had to talking about magic. But if there's something a bit more recent, I think somebody mentioned Ronald Hutton. Well, Ronald doesn't really write about magic per se. But there are some modern authors who have covered that subject, but there's so many of them now, and it's so difficult to narrow it down. So is it classical magic, like the Greek magical papyri, or is it magic that was, in the 19th century, or magic as we've emerged in the 20th century? So it's a bit difficult to pick one, really.
Yeah, no, I agree. I've got one in mind, but it's more of the effect that it had on me reading it. Many years ago, I read Philip Kuhn's book, Soul Stealers, the Chinese Sorcery Scare of 1768. And it kind of like opened me up to how the histories of witchcraft and magic what's beyond Europe and maybe New England and everything like that. It kind of like made me quite hungry to find out what the magical cultures were like in Africa, South America, Asia, and so on. So yeah.
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 No, I agree. Yes, it's difficult. I mean, it's such a broad subject. It's very difficult to narrow it down. Until I started my doctoral research, I was always more interested in Renaissance magic. And my first passion was actually the tarot and looking at how the tarot affected us. And that's why I was so thrilled to see the upcoming exhibition, January 2025. I'd be really interested in that.
We did have a question earlier in the workshop from Bethany who on that topic. It's for Claire, which does the Warburg Institute have any information on the original card game that tarot cards came from?
Yes, so I answered in the chat. There's a couple of class marks that would be a good place to start. So you can search on specific class marks in our catalogue so that you can see everything that's held in that general area. So I think Andrea answered in the chat with a specific book, and that's a good place to start. And at the same class mark, there's other material on like that same general background to tarot. So the two class marks I think are FMA 1100 and FMA 1175. If I scoot back and see that I'm right, am I? Yeah. So worth having a look in the catalogue for general material on that.
I think there's another question for you, Claire, in the chat. Which of the resources would you say are essential for researching Arabian magic?
Good Lord. Not my area of expertise, unfortunately. As a good librarian, my answer is always go to the catalogue, do keyword searches and see where it takes you. Yeah, unfortunately, I think you're getting better answers in the chat than you're going to get from me on Arabian magic, unfortunately.
If I can just return to the earlier question for a minute, someone mentioned Chris Gobson's book on the history of magic. I think one of the interesting things about magic is that until fairly recently, magic and witchcraft were always presented as they died out. The decline of magic and witchcraft declined by the end of the 19th century. It was gone. But clearly that isn't the case, because we have an enormous number of people today who practice different forms of magic and modern pagan witchcraft. And you've only got to put in a search engine in Google and you come up with something like 60 million hits. It didn't decline and it didn't die. So I think that's something that is becoming more apparent. It shifted. It looks different, but the techniques are based on what has been done for many, many years. But I think it's interesting that the mention of Chris's book just triggered that in my head.
Yeah, I found that interesting as well. So I think early on, I've not really done much reading into it, but I'm always intrigued. Say, did Francis Barrett publish something in the early 19th century, the Margus or something like that? I'm always interested in the circumstances around that publication and what was the appetite for it at that time, at the so-called height of the Enlightenment. So no,
they were still there. I think one of the things that makes witches and magic so enduring is the fact that they are shapeshifters, not in the sense of shape-shifting into an animal, but they shape themselves to reflect the society in which they're found. And that means that they do survive. They just adapt and grow. It's like a river. It might have a different way of flowing through the landscape, but it still flows. It's still a river. And I think that is also applied to magic and witchcraft. Yeah,
definitely. Just one question that I had, just in my head, basically. What are some of the, as I mentioned, implicit sources, like not the obvious sources and everything like that. So what are some of the implicit sources that might be useful in either your respective libraries or what you've used in your earlier research, for anyone that's obviously researching history of magic, that you found useful, that has borne quite a lot of information? Because, as I say, for the example here, we recently, about a month ago, got a donation of early 20th century UK lifestyle and household magazines, which obviously include quite a lot of information on popular astrology and adverts on different fortune telling services and everything like that. I'm just wondering what are some of the unexpected sources that people have used or discovered in their collections or research.
Was that one to me?
To you, to everyone, basically.
All of us?
Yeah.
I think the periodicals and the newspapers have been absolutely phenomenally useful, because they do place the idea of witches and magic in the social context. So you're reading about them, like the examples I used about politicians being mocked through the use of witchcraft. Spiritualism was huge, obviously, in the Victorian period, and very often that was used with witchcraft to mock people for being credulous and superstitious. And so for me, having the option to look at the practices within the context of what society thought about them was really interesting.
Definitely, yeah.
One thing I found was, I think you've already mentioned it, around kind of local history journals, both they are particularly helpful, but also popular history magazines like History Today, that was surprising in terms of preparing for the workshop. What I found in the bibliography is that there were quite a number of articles on different topics around witchcraft and magic and prophecy in History Today.
There's another question, interesting question in the chat by Catherine Wilkinson. It was mentioned that alchemy was book magic. Was there a reason for that? Is there a specific source for, say, folk alchemy or anything? That's a really interesting question, because part of my research very, very long time ago was looking at medical alchemy. Unfortunately, it did kind of like still reside very much within the book scholarly sphere and everything. But it'd be interesting to see how, say, medical alchemy diffused down into other medical practitioners. I'm not aware of any kind of like resource at the moment, but that'd be something that I would quite look into further. So.
I think alchemy is another one of those areas where the definition can be so immensely flexible that perhaps we could say that alchemy is reflected as book magic because it was a type of practice that was transcribed quite early on. And other types of magic perhaps were less open to being recorded, because the people who practiced alchemy on the whole could also write, or they had access to being scribes who could make the records for them. So it's difficult to say whether it, what came first, the chicken or the egg. I mean, it was a practice that was common, and then it was recorded.
Right. Okay. Right.
There was, it may have not been touched on already, but there was also a question from Emma about what resources on prophecy would you recommend?
So at the Warburg, we have a specific section of our magic and science collection, which is devoted to prophecy. So again, you're welcome to have a look at the library catalogue. I think it's FH, the class mark starts with. I can't think of anything specifically, but search online and you might find something of interest.
Say as well, if you do a subject search for prophecy in our catalogue, quite a lot will come up. Almanacs can be quite an interesting resource. We have quite a lot of prophetic almanacs in the Harry Price Library for kind of 17th, 18th century prophecy, and also Joanna Southcott. We have a lot of material related to her because that was something that Harry Price got involved in a rather suspicious way. But yeah, so if you do a subject search or keyword search for prophecy in the catalogues, I think you'll find quite a lot.
Yeah, and within BBIH, we do have a narrower term that's prophecy and prediction. So in terms of thinking about keywords, thinking about also including predictions within that might also be helpful as well in terms of using other library catalogues or resources, if it's not necessarily, if prophecy isn't getting what you want, predictions might also help as well.
Yeah, just to reiterate what other people have said, you know, doing like subject searches, prophecy. I'm not aware that there would be too much in the IHR library at the moment, but there might be things within our, especially in our medieval sources. So. Right.
I think that's everything that I can see that's come up in the chat.
Yeah, I think if there's no other... Ooh. Okay, so if there's no further questions, we just want to thank everyone that has come today, and we really hope that this session has been useful for everyone. So thank you.